Sumter has fallen, 1861. Yes, here on the Untold Civil War, we are more interested in newspapers from the 1860s than we are of the news of today. Of course, when I look at these papers, I like to think of their value as a primary source. You have to realize that newspapers back then, just like news agencies today, had their own narrative that they wanted to tell, their own agenda, their own perspective on things. You had papers that were pro-Lincoln, there were papers that were anti-Lincoln, pro-abolition, pro-secession. The list goes on. So it's important when you read these newspapers to understand where they're coming from in order to better understand their value in understanding Civil War America. Just like today, there was fake news back then. You look at one newspaper that produced an illustration of Jeff Davis when he was captured. They put out there an illustration of Jeff Davis captured in a dress, wearing his wife's dress as a disguise to escape Union forces. Of course, this was not true. Jeff Davis was actually captured in a suit, and I'll post a picture of that suit up here because I actually got to see it on display at the American Civil War Museum in Richmond. I think the story grew out from an instance of Jeff Davis being captured, and on him he had his wife's hanky or something like that. And the story grew from there. Of course, P.T. Barnum got wind of the story, and he actually offered Secretary of War Stanton $500. Told Stanton basically that he would give the Sanitary Commission $500 for the dress of Jeff Davis. For his American Museum of Curiosities. Well, of course that didn't happen because there was no dress. Of course, this never stopped P.T. Barnum. And he actually bought a wax figure and bought a dress and dressed this wax figure in this dress and put it on display as the Belle of Richmond. Many people came to view this oddity in his museum, and actually a comical scene took place when the museum caught fire in regards to this effigy of Jeff Davis.
One man had the Jeff Davis effigy in his arms and fought vigorously to preserve the worthless thing, as though it were a gem of rare value. On reaching the balcony, the man, perceiving that either the inanimate Jeff or himself must go by the board, hurled the scarecrow to the iconoclasts in the street. As Jeff made his perilous descent, his petticoats again played him false, and as the wind blew them about, the imposture of the figure was exposed. The flight of dummy Jeff was the cause of great merriment among the multitude, who saluted the queer-looking thing with cheers and uncontrollable laughter. The figure was instantly seized and bundled off to a lamp-post in Fulton Street, near St. Paul's churchyard, and there formally hanged, the actors in this mock tragedy shouting the threadbare refrain, commencing the sour apple tree. The New York Times.
Another part of the history of newspapers during the Civil War is how they had to keep producing editions with scarce material. One newspaper in Vicksburg actually resorted to using wallpaper to get their editions out to the public. This wallpaper newspaper was discovered by Union soldiers when they came into Vicksburg on July 4th. And they actually decided to write a final edition of this paper and publish it for the Southern readers. And of course, the curiosity of being produced on wallpaper did not escape them, and you can see that in their final message in the final edition.
July 4th, 1863. 2 days bring about great changes. The banner of the Union floats over Vicksburg. General Grant has caught the rabbit. He has dined in Vicksburg, and he did bring his dinner with him. The citizen lives to see it. For the last time it appears on wallpaper. No more will it eulogize the luxury of mule meat and fricasseed kitten. Urge Southern warriors to such diet nevermore. This is the last wallpaper edition, and is, excepting this note, from the types as we found them. It will be valuable hereafter as a curiosity. The Daily Citizen.
Of course, lastly, I think it's best to mention that soldiers did like to produce their own newspapers to pass the time and sort of tell their side of the story. One of the newspapers that was produced by these Union soldiers was called the Stars and Stripes. Now that probably rings a bell because the Stars and Stripes is still in existence today and does tell the story from the soldier perspective, news stories from the soldier perspective, I should say. Now, I believe the Stars and Stripes really got its start in World War II, but it can be argued that it can trace its lineage back to the first time that title was used, the Stars and Stripes, by Union soldiers writing their own newspaper back in the Civil War. And so even today in our news world, in our world of journalism, we can still see evidence of those newspapermen / soldiers, even today online and in paper. So that's kind of the story I just wanted to tell about newspapers in the Civil War. I really appreciate you all coming on to listen to that. While I'm on here, I'd like to thank my sponsors, the Badge Maker, as you all know, and of course Civil War Trails. I really appreciate them for sponsoring the show. The show would not be possible without them. I'd also like to thank all of my supporters on Patreon. Again, this show would not be possible without them. If you really liked what we talked about here today, please go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go ahead and check out my video on understanding the Union, where I go further in depth on primary sources, particularly on the Union side, and sort of my top primary sources and better understanding the Union war effort. Also, please follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and if you're not really listening to the podcast, if you're only watching the YouTube videos, bear in mind there is so much more content on the audio side of things, so I'll leave a link to the podcast down below. So please go check that out while you wait for the next YouTube video to come out.